And good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Wednesday, the 23rd of April, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway. Robert, good morning. There are two key judges here, two key federal judges in the ongoing saga with the Trump administration and these injunctions. There's Boasberg and is it Zenis, I believe. And Zenis has recently come out and taken a pretty hardline stance against the Trump administration. She's saying the administration stonewalling, quote unquote, ends now. What are the details and where do you see this going?
Morning, Mike. That's right. She said this during a hearing yesterday, and she accused the Trump administration of making vague and unsubstantiated claims of privilege over some of this information that she wants. And she set a 6 p.m. Eastern deadline today for the Trump DOJ to respond to her orders. Boasberg has been, as you mentioned, the other judge. I think he's been much more trying to pump the brakes on this constitutional crisis situation that is developing. But Zenis does not seem to be pumping the brakes, and I think we could see criminal contempt charges headed to the DOJ. But I think obviously Pam Bondi is not going to follow through with that, which is, I think, ratcheting up the tensions around this constitutional crisis narrative.
Yes. We were talking before the show started, and we both agree. This is going to be central to these groups like Indivisible, the national protest groups. They're going to latch onto this. James Carville, who he came out against the extreme social policies, like all the trans stuff, and he said this is the reason why Democrats got wiped out is because they doubled down on this insane stuff, and the American public just wasn't going for it. He's a Clinton-era Democrat. He's more on the moderate side. I think he's had pretty good insight, including that, basically saying Democrats are going way far to the left, way too far to the left. Most recently, he advised the Democrat Party, these Democrat politicians, not to pivot to the economy. He said this due process stuff is a winning issue. Democrats should double down on due process. I think that's probably why we've seen multiple rounds of congressional delegations now head to El Salvador. There's a handful down in Louisiana trying to, I guess, have some of their constituents released. These are non-U.S. citizens. I can't even pronounce their names. But they've been detained by ICE for various infractions or doing things that the State Department doesn't like. So apparently their visas are being revoked. At any rate, Robert, what do you make of that? James Carville says this is a winning issue for Democrats. They need to double down on this due process stuff.
I think he's correct, and that's a better argument to try to get across to most Americans rather than just openly defending someone who appears to be an MS-13 member based on, I think recently released documents and photos of his tattoos. And however, I don't think that most Americans are necessarily going to side against the Trump administration on this. I don't think they're going to really care that if Trump does defy the courts, which I think he's been doing basically this whole time. I think I think the conception here is that Trump is going to walk out, like Caroline Leavitt's going to walk out in a press conference, unfurl a scroll, and say Trump is defying the courts, but that's not how it works. And so I think Trump has been doing this the whole time and just doing things like revoking the visas for politically activated foreign grad students, which is the Louisiana situation, like they've been doing when ICE detains these political activists that are from foreign countries. They have been shipping them out of New York. A lot of them are at Columbia or other states to Louisiana to try to expedite their deportations. And I don't think most people will oppose that, actually.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair for the Trump administration to say that the United States should not be the dumping ground for foreign activists in these internecine ethnic and religious squabbles. Let them do that stuff over there. They don't need to do it here. I agree. I think that's probably a winning message for the Trump administration. All right, let's move on to this FERC deal. Apparently, President Trump is getting ready to somewhat clean house, or at least remove the commissioner and replace him with someone who's more amenable to the policies. What's going on? First of all, what is FERC, and kind of what's your bottom line here?
Yeah, so it's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and Commissioner Willie Phillips said he's going to step down. This is at the request of the White House. His resignation is going to end the Democrat majority on the FERC, which was 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And now President Trump can appoint a new Republican FERC commissioner and start getting, I think the plan is to get a lot of these energy reforms started now, based, we're getting these permitting reforms and stuff to ramp up energy production.
Mm-hmm. This is a national security issue. The Trump administration had talked about, we're going to reindustrialize the United States and we're going to build all these AI data centers. And there's just not enough energy. We have Obama and Biden to thank for that Clean Power Plan 2.0, as you've been talking about for a couple of years now. So this seems like a step in the right direction for U.S. energy security. And then let's move on. Let's talk about Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. I think the kind of conventional wisdom here is correct, that the Trump administration maybe realizes that they went too hard, too fast on the tariffs. They did not have a lot of victories. We were promised all these trade deals and how the trade deals were going to be great and wonderful, and all these countries are just going to come to the table and beg the United States not to implement these tariffs. I think the response generally has been lackluster. So it does appear to me, at least, like President Trump has more or less sidelined Peter Navarro, who is the big tariff guy, and is listening a lot more closely to Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who warned him that these policies we're going to break the bond market. I think this is why we have seen this Trump pivot. So it sounds like to me like Scott Bessent is serious about this pivot, and it's going to happen. So what's the latest here?
Yesterday, Bessent said during a private meeting with J.P. Morgan Chase that the U.S.-China trade war is unsustainable and that they're trying to find a way, or they must find a way, to de-escalate these trade tensions. And Trump also openly said yesterday that he is willing to negotiate a trade deal with China that's going to decrease the tariffs. And he also came out and said that he is not planning to fire Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. And I think all of this is messaging for domestic consumption, because they want to calm down these markets. Mm-hmm. And I think more importantly, increase the perception of U.S. financial stability. Because as we mentioned yesterday, a lot of the foreign investors in the United States that are retreating out of the market are not going to treasuries, according to all these fund managers. And they're going to commodities and the yen and other foreign currencies. But I think even though this is meant to try to calm that down, Bessent, I think, is still likely pushing for that China trade wall, or the China economic containment strategy, just probably at a slower pace. But he is in a race against a 90-day global tariff pause to get these trade deals done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. The Trump administration wants Treasury yields to come down. He wants interest rates to come down. So far, it has not happened. But remember, the U.S. Treasury has to refinance something like $6.5 trillion in the first 6 months of this year. So prior to June, $6.5 trillion. They want to do that at lower rates. They got to get bond yields down. If you want bond yields down, you need money coming into treasuries, not going out of treasuries, which is what's been happening. Robert, I agree that a lot of this is for domestic consumption to bolster this narrative of the dollar and treasuries are still safe haven assets. Your money is safe, far safer in the United States than it is almost literally anywhere in the world. But I think this also has a foreign audience. They simply need foreign investors buying treasuries, and I guess this is one way to do it. All right, Robert, thanks for that. Let's go ahead and move on to today's roll-ups. Jared, all right, tariff deals are these trade deals with foreign countries. They're also aimed at stopping Chinese transshipment, and that is where China exports some goods to a third-party country like Vietnam or Philippines or somewhere else, Mexico, and then you get a made in Mexico stamp on the box, and then it gets re-exported into the United States. That's called transshipment, and apparently Asian allies are starting to cooperate with the United States. What's going on?
Absolutely. So South Korea's tackling that directly. They found actually quite a few illicit products moving through. They were completely undeclared, getting a made in Korea sticker, and then shipped off. 97% of what they found was heading right to the United States. Mm-hmm. And India is trying to do the same thing. They're reviewing an agreement with their ASEAN allies. Basically, China makes steel over in ASEAN, ships it over to India. India is trying to prevent that. Now, moving over to Europe, Vice President J.D. Vance confirmed that the United States proposed a peace deal for Ukraine and Russia that demands Ukraine cede all of the territory that's already under Russian control. We've covered that pretty extensively. He added also that it is absolutely time for them just to accept what is on the table, or the U.S. walks. And I think we should take that very seriously, because the U.S. needs to build its military-industrial complex up for a pivot to Asia. And I think very notably, the European allies were all briefed on this yesterday, including the NATO Secretary General, and not a word has come out about this from from them. So I think they've accepted this.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point.
And moving much closer to home, the Mexican Secretary of Security and Citizen Protection said that Mexican authorities have identified and deleted 200 social media accounts used to recruit drug mules for the cartels. He also added that 41 more are still under investigation. So attacking, I think that'd be appropriately called midstream. And at the same time, they released a lot of numbers on the overall crackdown since October of 2024. There's over 18,000 people arrested for high impact crimes, almost 10,000 firearms seized, 144 tons of drugs, as well as 2 million fentanyl pills. They've destroyed almost 900 clandestine laboratories for meth production, and they more than 1 million liters and more than 200 tons of chemical substances have been seized as well. Mm-hmm. So they appear to be taking this very, very seriously.
You know what's funny to me? It's not like we've seen huge advancements in Mexican law enforcement capabilities. You say this happened between October 1st, 2024 to this month, April 2025. It's not like Mexico could not have been doing this in the summer of 2024, the summer of 23, or previous, obviously under AMLO and now under the new Mexican president, Sheinbaum. This goes back to kind of this Biden, Biden said, oh, we want to do more on the border, but we got to have these new laws passed and we got to have a border bill. And no new laws were passed. The border is shut down under the Trump administration. Sure seems like Trump obviously lit a fire under these Mexican officials to do more, which they could have been doing. They just haven't been doing, but they're doing it now. So, Jared, thanks for pointing that out. Anything else to add?
Nope.
Okay. All right, great. Let's move on here. Let's talk about Antifa real quick. We've not seen a lot of these direct action demonstrations. I can count on probably one hand the number that I've seen, and I follow these groups very closely. It's not to say that some smaller scale direct action has not happened. We've seen arson events. We've seen destruction of construction vehicles and destruction of property. But in terms of these larger scale mass direct action demonstrations, the black bloc type stuff, on one hand, I think we can pretty much count from election night of 2024 to now. My question is, will May Day be one of the instances where we see some black bloc style activity, this large scale direct action demonstrations? Revolutionary anarchist groups like Antifa in Seattle, Washington, and Portland, Oregon have announced two events on the 1st of May, otherwise known as May Day or International Workers' Day. Historically, that is an opportunity for these groups to go out and, as they say, quote unquote, be gay and do crime, for them to go out and smash windows, start fires, conduct property damage, vandalism, and other criminal activity. In Portland, they have announced a picnic. It's going to last from 4:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. Now, you may say, well, that's a picnic. It sounds kind of benign, and it absolutely does. In Seattle, they've announced a bonfire that starts at 5 p.m. Is this benign? Maybe. I pointed out, I think last week, one of the country's largest revolutionary anarchist blogs, if you want to know the state of Antifa, one of the country's largest revolutionary anarchist blogs published a post encouraging people to talk to their friends and family about climate change. Not blowing up cars, not firebombing Tesla dealerships, not going out and engaging in criminal activity. Talk about climate change. I think that's an important data point. At any rate, May Day historically is an opportunity for these groups to go out and conduct violent and disruptive direct action. Typically, when we see these anarchist events that devolve into direct action demonstrations, so things like vandalism, arson, other criminal activity, we'll typically see messaging that says things like bring a friend and wear a mask, implying that direct action is going to occur. Bring a friend, let's get a large group, wear a mask, or dress in your black bloc attire, a black mask, black clothes. We're not seeing that this year. Here's one of their images in a promo image for their May Day picnic. Pretty benign and boring. This year's May Day announcements are, as I said, pretty bland. The Portland Anarchist Picnic is scheduled to end about an hour before sunset. The Seattle Anarchist Bonfire is scheduled to start at 5 p.m. and then go until late. They didn't say exactly what time. And I think that's important because Portland and Seattle remain ground zero for the revolutionary anarchist and Antifa movement. Both cities and groups have really struggled to gain traction since the end of their sustained insurrectionary activity in 2021. We have seen a handful of events. There was on election night 2024, there was a Black Bloc demonstration in Seattle, and it ended after Seattle police made arrests. They arrested 5 of these Antifa Black Bloc militants because I think they started spray painting. They're doing some kind of vandalism, and they were arrested. Over in Portland, we have seen Antifa groups engage in some limited direct action demonstrations like these Black Bloc demonstrations. All of those larger scale Black Bloc demonstrations have occurred under the direct observation of Portland police. And last summer, the Portland Police Bureau announced essentially a counterinsurgency campaign that they were going to start arresting people and try to piece out these networks, which is very important. I think it's another reason why we have seen a lack of Antifa Black Bloc activity. At any rate, destructive demonstrations on the night of Thursday, the 1st of May, and also into the weekend, they are clearly possible, although there are just not a lot of strong indicators to suggest that May Day is going to be as historically disruptive or violent as it has been in previous years. But if you're in Portland and Seattle, the greater area, this obviously remains a possibility. All right, let's move on here to California. Robert, looks like California Governor Gavin Newsom is kind of in damage control mode. Something you've been talking about for a year now is this trend of oil companies and refineries shutting down in the state of California due to these environmental regulations. They are leaving. That has been trending towards causing an energy crisis in the state. Now, Gavin Newsom is backtracking. What's going on?
Well, not just in California, but also according to state officials around California, a regional energy crisis. Specifically, when we talked about Phillips 66, which was the first oil refiner to say that they're leaving California late last year, I made that announcement. There were a bunch of energy officials and state officials in the region that said this is going to cause a major disruption to the fuel market in these other states.
So
and now,
like California, Nevada, which states are these impacted?
Arizona, I think Nevada, and I think even possibly as far, not as far east, but it's starting to hit Mexico and potentially Texas as well. But not all of Texas, obviously, because it's where these companies are moving. I think Phillips 66 announced that they're going to put more resources into their Texas refinery. And now another Valero Energy said they're now going to leave their San Francisco refinery as I think they said they're going to shut down by April 2026. And I think they're also looking to move to Texas. What I think is going on here is that Newsom is quietly trying to reverse this and siding against a lot of the powerful political interests that are pushing for more green energy and more crackdowns on these fossil fuel companies. Because this was from a letter that was leaked where he's directing the California Energy Commission to start high-level immediate engagement with these oil companies to try to keep them in the state. He says to ensure affordable and stable supply of fuel. So I think, one, Newsom is likely heeding these warnings from these Southwest state officials that these new refinery regulations could severely disrupt fuel markets in the region. And I think there's also Newsom is also looking ahead to 2028, when I think he's going to make a White House run. He's currently term limited as governor of California, and he's out in 2026, and that would put him right in the election cycle for 2028. So I think he's doing this quietly because there are politically powerful groups in California, like the California Labor Board, that is ran by a former state rep named Morena Gonzalez that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. And I think he's trying to eschew those state level interests in a run for a national level office as well.
That would be a bad look if Newsom's policies were directly tied to gas shortages in California. How serious? I haven't looked at the pad numbers, but how serious is the gas? Is California running into gas supply issues yet?
I haven't seen that they have hit shortages yet, but that's what they're concerned about as both of these major refineries start to shut down heading into next year.
Mhm. All right, interesting. Thanks for staying on top of that. And then let's move on to ICE. All right, so the ACLU is complaining that ICE is enforcing immigration law, but they're using like Western Union and money apps to target these illegals in the United States. What's going on?
Yeah, the ACLU said that they're using these money transfer apps like Western Union to get geolocation data for illegal immigrants, which ACLU says is an illegal violation of privacy and human rights. But they also said they're using data from an Arizona-based NGO, non-government government organization. It's called the Transaction Records Analysis Center. It's been running since I think 2022 or before 2022, and it's ostensibly a nonprofit, but it's actually ran by the Arizona Attorney General. And they said they're using the data to track illegal immigrants' money transfers between Mexico and states like California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, because they're trying to access these illegal immigrants' location information. And I think this is a sign that the Trump administration is trying to ramp up deportations, because they have been slow going. And part of that is a lack of federal level resources. There's only so many ICE agents and FBI agents to go around, and state and local efforts to block cooperation with ICE, as we saw, I think, reported yesterday with Arizona, where the Arizona governor vetoed a state level bill that passed through their state legislature to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. And then also recently, there's, DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency, has gained access to IRS data and the Executive Office for Immigration Review Court and Appeals System data, which I think the Trump administration is also likely going to leverage on these immigration enforcement operations.
Mm-hmm. All right. And so ACLU, have they filed a suit trying to shut this down? Basically, I'm asking, are we like 36 hours from Judge Boasberg saying, ICE, you can't have this data anymore?
I think so. Because ACLU, since that Supreme Court decision basically telling the district courts to knock it off with the nationwide injunctions before they step in, ACLU has said that they are going to every single court, all 94 district courts, to file lawsuits, and I expect a lawsuit in this case as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And then let's move on. Jared, I think we get you back on. Kind of bottom line up front here, looks to me like Asia is nuclear armament in Asia is looking far more likely. What's going on?
Yes. So this is coming from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and it's based on the idea that China is likely to use nuclear weapons on Australia, but Australia cannot develop its own nuclear weapons. So that's coming from
Australia can't develop their own nuclear weapons due to domestic laws. I mean, is that a government thing?
No, due to capacity. They don't have the industrial capacity or the technical know-how to develop their own nukes.
Okay.
That's coming from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, the think tank that's making this recommendation in the first place.
Okay.
Now,
and then just briefly, just to go back, is it correct that they believe China is going to use nuclear weapons against Australia? Like, under what conditions or what scenario would that happen?
In a regional war, so what we're looking at with 2027, they think that the U.S. is sufficiently hardened so that China will not risk an unmitigated nuclear war, and they may end up using it against military infrastructure in the region that cannot provide a response. So Australia, since they don't have
talking
nukes,
about tactical nukes or ICBMs? I don't see this as incredibly likely, except for like under the most extreme circumstances, i.e., China's losing this war. Maybe they will go to nukes.
They didn't clarify what kind of nukes, but nevertheless, they did believe it. And the ASPI is government funded by the Australian government. So this is the Australians recommending it to themselves here.
Okay.
They're saying that Australia should continue supplying uranium to allies developing nuclear weapons if it serves Australia's national security interests, even if it violates the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, there are already talks going on. I'm seeing it all the time in Japan, and it's shown up a few times over in South Korea about developing their own nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of them is likely to start developing nukes in the near future, probably secretly at first.
Yeah, I think if you're Japan, you have to.
Japan, the people who watch this kind of stuff closely, they say Japan has all of the parts. It's just a matter of policy, and they have a pretty extensive nuclear energy infrastructure, so it's a matter of further enriching it, and then now you've got the fuel. Is they could probably develop it with well under a year. On top of that, Australia is the third largest uranium producer in the world. So this recommendation of continuing to supply uranium, I think, makes Asian allies far more amenable, because it's just a matter of getting your people on board if all of the pieces are in place. And the main piece, how do we have the fissile material, would come from Australia, and they're saying, we're going to keep giving it to you because we can't make nukes, but you can make nukes.
Mm-hmm. So is this a case where maybe Australia does not develop their own domestic nuclear capability, but maybe we see U.S. nuclear weapons being stationed in Australia?
That was one of the suggestions, is try to get a Cold War era policy from the U.S. reactivated, have them stationed in land-based nukes stationed in Australia, along with a lot of other recommendations about really bolstering Australia's conventional forces so that those are protected.
Mm-hmm. All right. This seems kind of crazy to me. By the way, we did see, what was it, last month, Chinese purchasing controlling interests in these Kazakh uranium mines, probably for the same intended goal, to maintain a steady supply of uranium for domestic energy policy, but also potentially for nuclear weapons here. So we're in a uranium access race here with China?
It seems like that, yes. And one interesting thing I found while looking for this graphic here is that even though Kazakhstan is higher in production, it's considerably lower in the overall reserves. And Australia is the top. I'll go back and double check, but they were the top by a long way. They have far more uranium in reserves than anybody else.
Like stored uranium.
Yes.
Already pulled out of the ground.
Absolutely. So it's ready to go. It's just a matter of handing it over.
Okay. This ASPI thing, it sounds so extreme to me. I guess it's a little more real if you're in Australia, considering you're probably not going to repel some large scale Chinese military action, or I've seen people talk about invasion of Australia, maybe on a long enough timeline. I don't know. Jared, does it sound extreme to you?
At first glance, it does, but their reasoning behind it saying, oh, well, China doesn't want to risk eating a nuclear war with the United States. I get that. Okay. Yeah. China would absolutely eat a nuke. And based on ASPI's recommendations, it sounds like they don't think they're under the U.S. nuclear umbrella, which would mean China does not take a nuke if they nuke Australia, where they would if they hit Japan or South Korea.
Mm. Okay. I don't know, man. Seems pretty extreme to me, but again, this is the Australian Strategic Policy Institute saying this, not me or Jared. All right.
Yes.
All right. Any final closing statements on this?
No, we've covered it.
Okay, great. All right, thanks for that, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on to today's questions here, starting with Bad Wabbit here. Looking forward regarding Ukraine. I don't believe they will ever agree to or honor any peace deal, and probably talk about Crimea here. So how do you see it playing out without a peace deal? The Trump administration has said we can have peace between Russia and Ukraine, but Ukraine has to recognize, and the United States will recognize, Crimea as official Russian territory. We will unofficially recognize Donetsk, Luhansk, maybe some other areas under Russian control. Ukraine says that's too far. So realistically, Jared, how do you see this going?
Ukraine's only bound to not recognize Crimea by their constitution. It's just a matter of saying, okay, no, we're going to recognize it. We're going to change the constitution because you can just do that. It's in the long term, if they agree to peace and then go back on that peace, I don't see that as likely, because prior to 2022 and in 2014, Ukraine largely had at least verbal agreements that they would have international support. They don't have that now. They cannot afford to go to another war.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I don't know. It seems like Zelensky is, I guess what would cause Zelensky to backtrack on this red line, for Zelensky to say, yeah, okay, we'll officially give Crimea up, even though we don't like it. I don't know. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on to, go ahead, Jared. To El Salvador. The U.S. has corruption issues like El Salvador when Bukele took over. and reigned in courts. So yeah, Bukele said that El Salvador was essentially under judicial tyranny, and I think Bukele was probably promoting those tactics, as Ben says, promoting those to the Trump administration. I think even on Twitter/X, El Salvador President Nayib Bukele has even said, the United States has the exact same problem I did. You've got to rein in the courts. So, Robert, are we going to see President Trump assert emergency powers? We talked about there's a course of action where Congress can help solve this problem. Congress has the power to remake these federal courts, even abolish some of these district courts that have become a problem. I don't see there's a lot of stuff that the Trump administration can do via the executive branch. So I guess we're waiting or depending on the Supreme Court to put their foot down here.
I think so. Yeah, the Trump administration has heavily invoked these different emergency powers, but I don't think there's any that exist that give the executive branch the authority to actually do anything against the courts. It is a constitutional issue. These are Article 3 courts, where that means Article 3 of the Constitution that says that Congress must put a Supreme Court together, and then at their own discretion can have lower federal courts, and that's where that power derives from Congress to be able to just abolish the federal court system and then remake it. I think that path is unrealistic. That would be a significant political escalation on the Republican Party's part. I think we're down to basically Trump has to wait for the Supreme Court to either rein in or not rein in these nationwide injunctions, and then decide whether he is going to tell them that he's going to ignore them or not. That's all that I think the executive branch really has the power to do, is ignore these court orders.
And then some oral arguments are starting on May 15th. So we may see a ruling here coming, this summer, maybe by June.
Yeah, and that's the birthright
Court.
citizenship. Yeah, and that's the birthright citizenship case where Trump did issue an executive order basically saying they're going to end birthright citizenship for national security reasons, I believe. And yeah, that's where we could see the Supreme Court tell these district courts to rein this in, and that their orders only apply to the districts and the people in the cases, and not what the ACLU has been doing by trying to create these nationwide class action lawsuits and then get these nationwide restraining orders.
I hate to beat this dead horse, but realistically, what's stopping the Supreme Court just from saying, all right, we have all these nationwide injunctions. Some of them may be dubious. They're obviously politically motivated. We're just going to make a ruling, and we're going to tell the Trump administration what's constitutional and what's unconstitutional. It seems like they have not gone down that path. What's stopping them from maybe doing that?
Nothing. And I think Roberts could try to lead the Supreme Court down that path, because he's trying to strike a balance between siding with Trump and siding with the district courts, and trying not to undermine the authority of both. So I think there, at the very least, 4 of the 9 justices, and I think it's Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Thomas, and Alito, have basically said they want to rein in these nationwide injunctions. Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett seem to be kind of the swing votes. And they could put out a decision potentially saying, well, these certain types of nationwide injunctions on what these given topics are unconstitutional, assertion of power over the executive branch, and these others aren't, and try to strike that balance.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, much more to come on this. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question regarding Antifa. Are they still funded by U.S. tax dollars via USAID or anywhere else, or have they been forced into more organic funding and organizing? Listen, I don't know of any direct funding. I don't think these Antifa groups are being given checks by USAID. I think it is trickled down. I think money flows into the NGOs, and private donations are given to these protest groups, and then that money is maybe given to some of these groups. I think there's a case to be made that funding went into equipment for some of these groups in 2020. So I think, especially starting off back in 2016, honestly, I think a lot of these groups were self-funded. I think people just bought their own stuff, and they took time off of work, or they took their own money to buy stuff. at some point, I do believe that they were getting trickle down funding, but I don't think it was direct. I don't think it can be that obvious. But again, I don't work for financial crimes. I'm not a FinCEN guy, so I can't tell you that for sure. All right, let's move on. Who do you think is the likely replacement for Newsom in the California governor's office? Well, Robert, I've heard about maybe Kamala Harris running for California governor. I'm sure there's some others. I don't know. At this point, it seems kind of too early to speculate. But other than Kamala Harris, anyone that matters?
I forget her name. There's a former, I think, Congress member who's also announced she's running for governor. She's the favorite according to polling, unless Harris announces. And if Harris announces, it's Harris by a pretty wide margin.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, Jared. Regarding uranium, does the United States have a domestic uranium? I know we have uranium here, but we're not on the list.
We are not. I'm looking up an answer to that now, just because this would be, hey, where do we stack up? We're obviously not in the top 10. I think we are. No, we're not an enrichment spot.
All right. Would Australia be able to buy nukes if they supply the uranium, but other allied nations build them? I don't think this is a case where you can just buy nukes. You got to have engineers. You got to have the personnel, the training, the infrastructure, especially land-based nukes. You got to put them in the ground. You got to build the bunkers. Are there any above ground? I guess you can put them on a plane, but still, you have to have storage for nuclear weapons, and they could be put on a plane. Jared, I mean, is there any case for Australia just buying them?
I don't think so. I don't think I've ever heard of somebody selling a nuke that didn't end up then getting the electric chair.
Yeah, it seems far more likely that if this were going to happen, like the Cold War, the nuclear missile crisis, where we put nukes in Turkey, it just seems to me like Australia would not buy them. It would just be whoever the president is, President Trump or the next president, whomever, saying maybe very quietly, secretly, we're going to put some nukes in Australia as a counterweight. But that seems extremely escalatory. Seems like it would be a huge red line for, I mean, China has a massive problem with this X-band radar that was over in South Korea. They're going to have huge problems with nukes in Australia. It seems like it's would be escalatory.
There is one way you could potentially do it without any kind of extra treaties. The U.S. Navy is developing what's called the Slickerman, the sea-launched cruise missile nuclear tipped. Those will go on basically any ship that has a vertical launching system. If you have a rotational presence in there, you're not going to disclose who's got it. You could potentially say, look, you're under the nuclear umbrella, just don't mention it. Okay. So that would give them assurance without publicly disclosing that we have nukes in that area. And you just don't talk about what the actual composition of loadouts are in the vertical launching systems at any given point.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then here, last question here. I think, Jared, we've probably already talked about some of this stuff. All right, last question for today's show is, do you see this as more balkanization of the United States, as blue states will continue with these local injunctions? I think balkanization on a long enough timeline has potential. In certain cases, I think it could happen. I don't see it as a huge issue now. I think there's a very, very, basically not impossible. It's just extremely unlikely. And balkanization refers back to the Balkan Peninsula, where you have the breakup of Yugoslavia into like 7 or 12 different countries or something like that. And basically the balkanization theory says America it's no longer culturally homogeneous, religiously, ethnically, racially, whatever. And so the balkanization theory says, just like the breakup of Yugoslavia, you're going to see the breakup of the United States around cultural or ethnic lines, and it will be far more tribal than it is today. Basically, our fruit salad, it's not a melting pot. Our fruit salad is going to jump into separate bowls instead of being in one bowl. Again, on a long enough timeline, it's a possibility. I don't see it anytime soon. Robert?
I think in the more near term, the way this could look is the blue state, red state coalition thing that seems to be happening over the last administration. And so what would, I think in the nearer term, the more realistic way this would look is basically there's the blue state courts and the red state courts, and they make their decisions. And then whichever one has control of the White House or the Congress sides with that coalition, and that we just take turns switching until in the long run, maybe we see balkanization.
Until we get tired of doing that. All right. Well, really, I think a lot of this too, it goes back to intra-elite conflict. We have a break in elite consensus. The establishment elite is fractured into elites and counter-elites. And historically, if anything's going to push the United States into civil war or balkanization, it's going to be when these elites say, this is it. It's they win. This is a zero-sum game. If they win, we lose. If we win, they lose. That is the only way forward for the United States. And I think when both elites and counter-elites come to that conclusion, we will be there. I don't think it's now. It's not now because Democrats are talking about the midterms and then talking about taking back power in 2028. So we're not there yet. All right. Thanks for that, Robert, and also Jared. And that's going to do it for today's morning briefing. Thanks so much for your support. Look, there's a lot going on in the world. It's every day. There's new stuff. A lot of it's junk. A lot of it's just absolutely 100% noise. But there are certain data points that have intelligence value. And that's what we talk about on this show. If you'd like to get access to the Early Warning Network, jump over to our news and intelligence app and stay on top of these developments. Understand what the future is going to look like, or understand where we could be going, so that you can make informed decisions. You can maintain situational awareness. And more importantly than that, gain situational understanding, actually understanding these trends. Start a free 7-day trial with us. Head over to www.earlywarningnetwork.com and try us out free for 7 days. You get our morning report. And then also you get all the information sharing that happens on the app throughout the day. And everyone, thanks for watching. That's going to do it for today's show. We'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning. Back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.